and that is the Republican opposition. And right now, there is no formal Republican opposition. There's a lot of different ideas that are out there. The House, when they when they voted to repeal, they basically are asking 3 House members to come up with recommendations. Am I correct?
Well, the Republicans are trying to come up with a plan to replace the Affordable Care Act. And the reason they're having such difficulty is that many of the ideas in the Affordable Care Act were originally Republican ideas. And so the health exchange, for example, Republican idea, individual mandate came from a conservative think tank. A lot of the issues around addressing the processes in this program, some of the grants and stuff, were conservative ideas. So this is truly, as Senator Landrieu said, was a compromise. A lot of ideas from both sides were put into this originally, and so it is tough when the best ideas have been put together on the table to come up with ideas that are new. Not that they can't. I wish them well, coming up with something that will provide universal health care in an affordable way for all Americans. And anyone who comes up with a new idea and a great plan, my organization will certainly look at it and see whether or not it makes sense.
Sure. What do you think is the chances that King versus Burwell, which is the case that is in front of the Supreme Court, might actually impact the mandates? Might actually be a real blow to say Obamacare?
I believe that the Supreme Court will affirm the tax credits in the Affordable Care Act and rule for the administration and against the plaintiffs, which means the subsidies will stay in place. I can tell you that if they don't, you will have absolute chaos in the insurance industry, and I can also assure you that it will not be limited just for those people that are in the Affordable Care Act. It would affect all of our health insurance.
Why is that? Why don't you explain to us, if you don't mind?
Well, the way insurance works is that all of us put into a pot, whether or not we're the same amount, pretty much, whether or not we're real sick or whether or not we're well. And the idea is that when you're real sick, you get to pull out money out the pot, i.e. Paying for health care. And when you're not real sick, you're contributing to others to be able to take care of their care. That's the way insurance works. It's a collaborative effort of all of us. If you allow only very sick people to be in a pool, or very well people to be in a pool, insurance doesn't work. And so what these health exchanges do is allow for people to be in a collaborative pool instead of having to buy insurance person by person. So let's say, for example, I have heart disease and diabetes. You're going to charge me more for insurance than someone who doesn't have any of those illnesses. And you're going to charge me a whole lot more than that other person. But if we're in the pool together, then they can charge both of us less. Or one of us a little bit more, one of us a little less. And that's fair. What happens with if you don't have that health exchange, we will have to go back to the way we used to do it, with very sick people having to pay so much for insurance that often they couldn't afford it, and very well people not having to pay very much. And in fact, if there's no individual mandate, which is also a challenge, that won't be necessarily challenged by King versus Burwell, but if it didn't exist, then there's no reason for healthy people to want to participate at all.
Right. Now, one of the areas that has really concerned me, and please, you can tell me if I'm wrong and explain why I'm wrong, but as an attorney, as somebody who's followed politics for quite a while, legislation quite a while, I basically came across, the thought came to me, well, wait a minute, if you repeal Obamacare, then the law obviously ends. So what happens to the insurance industry? What happens to the insurance contracts? What happens to the ability to pay for such things as the pre-existing conditions that we all love, that type of protection? What happens? To me, and just, tell me if I'm wrong, but to me, the first thing that's going to happen is somebody's going to go to the hospital and want the insurance to cover it. And if it's a pre-existing condition, the insurance company is going to say, no, we're not covering it, because that's no longer the law. I mean, help me. Am I wrong about this?
Well, the Affordable Care Act did several things to the broad population. One of the things, they made it illegal to discriminate based on pre-existing conditions. They made it illegal for you to deny people access to insurance. They made it permissible for your child to stay on your insurance policy until they were 26 years of age. They made it. They put in provisions so that the donut hole in the Medicare program went away. The donut hole was a place where people weren't covered for all their prescription drugs at a certain point when they had Medicare coverage. It fixed all those things, and all those things will go back to the way they were 10 years ago. And we think that that would be a terrible problem. We think the Affordable Care Act fixed that for many, many, many people in this country, and so we think that's a big problem.
Okay, so you agree with what I'm saying then, am I correct?
I practiced emergency medicine for many years, and I can tell you the first thing everybody asked me was, what was your insurance card? And I would have problems referring patients to doctors because they would ask, does this person have insurance? And the person didn't have insurance, we'd have to try to find someone to take care of them. We know that people died because they didn't have access to care. We know that people who were very sick were denied insurance and couldn't get care. We know that people put off care because they weren't able to afford their care because they didn't have insurance. We would go back to that time.
Yeah, and so those insurance policies that were in effect, say 2 years ago, are no longer in effect.
Well, we don't know exactly how it's going to, how the transition would occur. I can tell you that the cost to buy insurance will go up, and if it's not within a few months, it will certainly be when you renew your policy. So people concerned now about, under the Affordable Care Act, that there might be some slight increase in costs. I can assure you that if something happened to the Affordable Care Act, there would be large increases in costs.
Well, to me, and I'm not a doomsayer normally, but it just seems to me that in this type of scenario, you have a law that has provided certain protections to consumers. The law no longer, let's assume you have a repeal and a veto override. Let's just assume, and I don't think it's going to happen, but let's just assume that that's what happens because, a lot of people are clamoring for it. Okay, so let's, again, assume that it happens.
Well, a lot of people, there are people clamoring for it, but let's,
Sure. No, I understand. So the law would no longer exist. The policies that were in place a year or two before no longer exist. That was a contract, and that contract doesn't exist. What you now have is a contract between the parties, but the underlying funding of each one of those contracts are no longer the same. In fact, it's totally different. The money that would be used to help for the tax credits for, like we just talked about, that money is no longer there, okay, because the law would be repealed. So it just seemed to me that everybody might have a plan, and those plans ought to be discussed. But those plans are 3 months, a year, maybe a couple of years down the road. In the meantime, if you have a repeal, you can't repeal and say, okay, well, we're going to repeal, and 6 months down the road, okay, we're going to decide. No, because you have this interim period that people get sick and they need coverage. And insurance companies, the only reason why they have agreed to the pre-existing conditions coverage is because of the pool that you're talking about. Many, many more insureds.
Right.
So you know, I'm just trying to understand it. It just makes total logic to me. And you know, that's part of the reason why I wanted. Yeah.
Think of it this way: what would happen tomorrow if all of a sudden all of our car insurance went away? Now think about how many car accidents we have every day.
Sure.
All those people would be at risk.
Sure. I mean, there's no question. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that when the Republicans are putting these programs together, and I'm not saying that they're wrong to put programs together, because I think that the Affordable Care Act certainly ought to be fixed in areas that where that maybe it might be broken. Okay, so, but how in the world are they going to put those plans together at the same time of the repeal? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, you know, we're a nonpartisan organization, and so we'll work with anyone who wants to figure out how to both. We would love for them to figure out ways to improve the Affordable Care Act. There are certainly things that can be fixed, and that need to be fixed. Clarifications. Anytime you pass a big piece of legislation like that, there are things that need to be fixed, and we hope that both sides of the political aisle will get together and work collaboratively to fix those things that need to be fixed. I don't think we need a whole new replacement bill. I think we need to fix what we have in front of us, and I think that, you know, people have discovered where there are flaws and there are things that need to be fixed. I can tell you that the exchanges and the subsidies for those exchanges are not one of them. I think the law is pretty clear that the intent was always to provide those subsidies in those health exchanges. The debate was always here in Washington to have everyone eligible for them, whether or not they were state-sponsored or federally sponsored. So I think that that's not something that has to be clarified. And of course, the Supreme Court will make their decision on that, you know, by June or so of this year. But we're firmly of the belief that the legislative authority was there in the law, and it's very clear.
Okay, one last question, and that is, if you had your druthers and you were able to actually perfect a policy, you know, you're playing the Lord right now, what type of protections would you say would absolutely, without question of a doubt, have to be in a policy?
We would have done Medicare for all. We would have had a single-payer system that was Medicare for all. Understand, Medicare for all does not mean there aren't private insurance companies, because it would work just like the Medicare system. It would allow for private investment. You'll still have private doctors. You would still have private hospitals, but it would work very much like the Medicare system.
Okay. Well, Doctor, thank you so much for being with us, and I really appreciate your taking your time for us.
Stephen, thank you very much. You have a good day.